Quick, when I say the word nation, what picture comes to mind? If you're like most people, you see a colored shape on a map. It's got a border, a flag, maybe a government. And that's where modern instincts can mislead you, because that is not what the word means in the Bible, and it's not what it meant for most of human history. Welcome back to OT in Context. I'm Scott Smith. We spent the first part of this series building a foundation. Why modern readers struggle, why geography matters, and the shape of the one big story. Today we're starting something new. We're going to talk about the powers, the nations, kingdoms, and empires that shaped the world of the Old Testament. But before we can talk about Assyria or Babylon or Egypt, we need to define our terms. Because one of the most common words used in the Bible, nation, does not mean what you think it means. If you trace the English word nation back through French and Latin, you'll find a consistent thread. Words tied to birth, kinship, and descent. That's a helpful clue. But what really matters is how the Bible and the ancient world actually used the idea. The Hebrew words behind nation, words like goy and am, point to people groups, not political entities. And when you look at how the ancient Near East operated, the pattern is consistent. A nation, at its core, is a people, an identity anchored in shared ancestry traditions, shared worship, and a shared story. Not a country, not a government, not borders on a map, but rather as a people who understand themselves as belonging together. Think of it this way. Consider the Navajo Nation. What makes the Navajo a nation? They share a common ancestry. Out of that shared lineage grew a shared language, shared customs, a shared way of life, diet, religion, art, laws. But here's the important part. Those cultural characteristics did not create the nation. They emerged from it. As the first Navajo families grew, their daily routines became cultural patterns. Their need for order produced laws and governance. The culture is a product of the people, not the other way around. And that's how nations worked in the ancient world. In the biblical narrative, peoples like Moab, Edom, and Ammon are understood through ancestry. Their identities are presented as family lines that grew into peoples. Each became recognizable by their language, their gods, their way of life. But the source of each nation was a family tree. So here's your takeaway, and this is one of the most important reframes in this entire series. When you see the word nation in the Old Testament, think people, not country. Now, that doesn't mean ancient nations were closed clubs or pure bloodlines. Most nations had ways to adopt outsiders, usually through marriage or formal adoption, sometimes other means of incorporation. But the key was, to join, you had to actually become one of them. Learn their language, adopt their customs, worship their gods, internalize their history as your own. You had to become an insider. Peoplehood was defined by kinship and belonging, often genealogical, sometimes adopted, but not by passports and modern borders. Okay, so if a nation is a people and not a country, what is a country? The word you want here is state. A state exists where a government holds authority over a defined territory and the people within it. It has borders. It has laws. It can manage its own foreign affairs. In everyday language, a country and a state are essentially the same thing. This is what a state looks like. You can see borders. You can see territory. When I turn on the political boundaries layer in OT in Context, I'm showing you states, not nations. You cannot draw a nation on a map. You can only draw a state. Now, here's what makes this distinction matter. A government and a territory cannot generate a people. But a people, if they acquire land and control their boundaries and govern their inhabitants, can become a state. And if that state falls, if the government collapses and their territory is lost, the nation might still survive as long as enough of the people persist and hold on to their identity. Sound like anyone you know? Israel lost its state repeatedly, but the nation of Israel endured because a nation is not its borders. Now, there is a term for when a nation and a state perfectly overlap, when one people occupies one territory with one government. It's called a nation-state. Today, true nation-states are rare. Japan and Iceland come closest, but even they have ethnic diversity. Most modern states contain blends of multiple ethnicities, cultures, languages, and religions. And some states are very far from being nation-states. Think about the United States. We call it a nation all the time, but by ancient definition, we aren't one. Americans don't share a common ancestry. We don't share a single language, a single religion, a single ethnic heritage. The U.S. didn't arise naturally from a common tribe. It was designed as a political state and then populated. Americans can often be identified by outsiders. There are cultural markers, but that's a very different thing than what the Moabites or the Edomites were. In the biblical world, these peoples could trace their identity back to a common ancestor. Here's an even sharper example. In the 20th century, many modern Middle East borders were drawn with limited regard for existing ethnic and sectarian identities. Different languages, different sects, different peoples, all bundled under one government. The biblical world would have found this baffling. In the ancient Near East, states typically formed around nations, not the other way around. This confusion between nation and state is one of the biggest obstacles that modern readers bring to the Old Testament. We read nation and we picture a country on a map. But the text means a people with shared ancestry, shared worship, and a shared story. So why does this matter for reading the Old Testament? Because the story of Israel is, at its heart, the story of God creating a nation. Not a state, a people. God didn't start with a piece of land and fill it. He started with one man, Abraham, and made a promise. I will make you into a great nation. If you could visualize what a nation looks like, it wouldn't be a map. It would be a family tree. Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to 12 sons who became 12 tribes, bound together by a shared allegiance that shaped their worship, their story, and their way of life. At the time of that promise, there was no territory, no government, no borders. There was just a man and a covenant. The nation of Israel existed before the state of Israel by centuries. And understanding this distinction will change how you read almost every story that follows. When Israel rises out of Egypt, they're a nation, a people, trapped inside someone else's state. When they enter the Promised Land, the nation is finally becoming a state. When Assyria destroys the northern kingdom and Babylon exiles Judah, the state falls, but the nation survives. That's not a minor nuance. That is the engine of the entire Old Testament. So, a nation is not a country. A nation is a people, usually anchored in shared ancestry and ultimately defined by a binding allegiance that shapes their worship, their story, and their way of life. The biblical world operated with this distinction in practice. We've lost it, and it costs us every time we open the Bible. Next time, we're going to look at how these nations and states actually related to each other. Suzerains, vassals, treaties, and a political system so well constructed that God himself used it as the model for his covenant with Israel. I'll see you then.